Good evening, everybody, and good morning to those of you who will connect with us in the morning. And we'll begin our Dharma Talk evening as usual, chanting the refuges and the precepts together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Panatipata Veramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami Adina Dana Veramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami Abrahmacharya Veramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami Musawada Veramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami Sura Meraya Majapamadhatana Veramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami Vikalabhojana Veramani Sikapadam Samadhiyami Nacha Gita, Wadita, Visukadasana, Malaganda, Vilepana, Dharana, Mandana, Vipusanatana, Veramni, Sikapadam, Samadhiyami, Uchasayana, Mahasayana, Veramni, Sikapadam, Samadhiyami. Idam me silam maga palanyanasa pachayo otu. The title of this evening's talk is Mindfulness of the Mind. And I'd like to begin this evening with the definition of mindfulness that I shared with you last week. Mindfulness can be understood as the active aspect of awareness. It's a non-judging, non-manipulative, non-grasping, non-rejecting orientation to the present moment's experience. And at its best, a purely receptive relationship to whatever phenomena is presenting itself in the present moment. an amazing aspect of mindfulness is that it has the capacity to connect directly and simply to any of the experiences that come in through the six sense doors with what we can call bare awareness. With bare awareness providing very immediate and direct access to those experiences, just simply being known. And sometimes we may experience just this, but at times, and maybe quite often, the direct, simple knowing of phenomena may almost immediately be colored or modified by various mental factors or various states of mind. So, as I already said, this evening we'll explore mindfulness of the mind, citta nupassana in Pali. Mindfulness of the various mental factors or states of mind that arise in relationship to our experience. And some words regarding this from the great teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj. By knowing your mind, you may avoid your mind disabling you. You have to be very alert, or else your mind will play false with you. It's like watching a thief. Not that you expect anything from a thief, but you don't want to be robbed. In the same way, you give a lot of attention to the mind without expecting anything from it. Some years ago, I attended a meeting of Dharma teachers that included teachers from many of the various Buddhist lineages. And in one of our discussions, the question came up, what is Buddhism? Well, the Dalai Lama, who was one of our guests of honor at this meeting, said that often his response to this question, which he said he was asked fairly often, is Buddhism is about certain kinds of mental training to eliminate all kinds of afflictive emotions and all traces of this emotions. And then he went on to define realization, liberation, as the complete purification of afflictive emotions. This definition of realization of Nibbana, being the complete purity of the heart-mind, has been described as the mind and heart of an arahant. In hearing His Holiness the Dalai Lama say this, there was the sense that he spoke from a very deep place of confidence in truly believing that this is possible. In the many times that I've practiced with the Sayadaw U Pandita from Burma and also with Pawak Sayadaw from Burma, both of these very venerable teachers, U Pandita is no longer alive, Pawak Sayadaw is, both of these venerable teachers spoke of this same possibility in similar ways over and over again. And of course, the suttas, in the suttas, the Buddha often spoke of this aspect of liberation, this aspect of freedom in the same way. As our own confidence grows and as it deepens, we too begin to get at least some sense that this is our possibility. In its deepest sense, the basic aim of these teachings and practices isn't about what we ordinarily think of as having a happy life in this lifetime. And so here you all are, making physical and mental efforts in the service of the purification of the mind, in the service of the purification of the heart. Here in retreat and in our life outside of retreat, we come to know, to directly experience that through our practice, through our physical and mental efforts, certain states of mind increase and others decrease. And we begin to find that at least to some degree, we've let go of what is unwholesome. We've let go, at least to some degree, of what brings suffering, what brings harm to ourselves, and what's harmful to others. And we begin to find that the wholesome states of mind, of heart, are more and more our experience, more readily available. And so our feeling of connection and confidence in these teachings and practices takes deeper and deeper root. Confidence in our own capacity to realize the teachings, to be successful in relationship to our practice in the immediacy of here and now grows, along with confidence in relationship to our deepest goals. And some words from the Buddha from the Anguttara Nikaya. Abandon what is unwholesome, O bhikkhus. One can abandon the unwholesome. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do so. If this abandoning of the unwholesome would bring harm and suffering, I would not ask you to abandon it. But as the abandoning of the unwholesome brings benefit and happiness, therefore I say, abandon what is unwholesome. Cultivate what is wholesome, O bhikkhus. One can cultivate the wholesome. If it were not feasible, I would not ask you to do it. If this cultivation of the wholesome would bring harm and suffering, I would not ask you to cultivate it. But as the cultivation of the wholesome brings benefit and happiness, therefore I say, cultivate what is wholesome. The extraordinary wisdom, metta, and compassion of the Buddha. The heart mind of a Buddha sees only suffering and the end of suffering and encourages, exhorts those heading towards suffering to take care and to pay attention rather than judging or condemning them. And the heart mind of a Buddha, in seeing those heading towards the end of suffering, rejoices for them. This approach to life, this way of seeing, can be a great inspiration, inspiring feelings of confidence within us. It can be done. I can do it. Over the years of my practice, there certainly have been times when I've experienced various difficulties within myself in relationship to the teachings and in relationship to the practices. And when I've been able to really be very honest and humble about it with myself, I've seen that most of the time it's been because I was afraid that I wasn't capable of actualizing the teachings. And I've also found that when I've been filled with a wholesome and grounded confidence in relationship to myself, that my love and gratitude for the teachings, as well as for my own practice, has deepened and grown. The Venerable Pao-Ak Sayadaw says that we must always approach things with the attitude that you can be successful. This is what the Buddha taught. Once in a practice meeting with Pao-Ak Sayadaw during a 4-month concentration retreat that I was doing with him, I went in for a practice meeting with him and I said, Venerable Pao-Ak Sayadaw, this is just too hard. And Venerable Pao-Ak Sayadaw looked at me with great kindness in his eyes and light laughter and said, no, it isn't. Just that, that's all he said. No, it isn't. And it's true. The suttas, the direct teachings of the Buddha, are actually filled with this approach to practice. So this evening we'll explore a few of the difficult or afflictive colorations in the mind that arise in our human experience, and also explore some of the ways that the Buddha encourages us to work with them in the light of purification, in the light of the Dalai Lama's definition of liberation of the mind, liberation of the heart. It's as though all of us have skeletons in the closet. And the Buddha wasn't excluded from this. When he left the palace as a young man in search of freedom, in search of liberation from anguish and confusion, his search was grounded in finding liberation from his own experience of suffering. He wasn't looking for the truth of awakening from some idealistic or some philosophical stance. So these skeletons in the closet, the old and sometimes seemingly new, angers, fears, resistance, judgments, doubts, sadnesses, griefs, longings, strong desires, attachments, confusions, pains. It's a very long list, so I'm not going to keep listing. There's more. From our present life's experiences and carried on from many, many lifetimes' experiences. Some of these we may have mindfully met and seen with an open heart mind. Some of them we've ignored and hidden away. In our practice, we open to whatever arises, including things that may have been tucked away, these skeletons in the closet. But a very important point, it is not, capital N-O-T, it is not about dredging up. It is not about digging up afflictive states of mind. That is not what we do in our practice. Most of us, I would say pretty much all of us, need to discover the skeletons in order to find a really true depth of happiness in our life, or we'll just continue living in delusion, thinking we can be happy, but never really truly being so. Vipassana, mindfulness-based insight practice, allows us to open the closet and look into the boxes to uncover what may have been hidden, or maybe what we've hidden from, or maybe what we've judged as unacceptable and buried away. The skeletons in the closet that we may have been hauling around, often unconsciously, maybe unwittingly, maybe for a very long time. The poet and translator Stephen Mitchell wrote his version of the myth of Sisyphus, and I'd like to share this with you. We tend to think of Sisyphus as a symbol of a tragic mortal hero, condemned by the gods to shoulder his rock sweatily up the mountain and again up the mountain forever. The truth is that Sisyphus is in love with the rock. He cherishes every roughness and every ounce of it. He talks to it, he sings to it. It has become the mysterious other. He even dreams of it as he sleepwalks upward. Life is unimaginable without it, looming always above him like a huge gray moon. He doesn't realize that at any moment, he's permitted to step aside, let the rock hurtle to the bottom, and go home. Practice gives us some very powerful tools. The tools of concentration, mindfulness, investigation, metta, compassion, and equanimity. each of which help us to open to our experience from the clarity of a focused mind and from the heart of kindness, acceptance, and patience, enabling us to see clearly and enabling us to be able to go home. With concentration and mindfulness grounded in kindness and a non-judgmental presence, our possibility is to realize that fear, anger, doubt, strong desire, attachment, sadness, shame, irritation, judgment, worry, expectation, disappointment really have no more control over us. We begin to realize that the reactive, habitual need to analyze or experience it over and over and over again, or the habit maybe of trying to get rid of it, or trying to fix it, or trying to ignore it, or maybe the habit of deluding ourselves with a seeming equanimity, this, oh, well, it's really nothing attitude. We begin to realize that none of these reactive habitual patterns really serve us. When we begin to meet and see these reactive habit patterns, these colorations of the mind within the heart of kindness, the door to clear seeing or seeing through is opened. The beginning of a healthy response rather than unconsciously dropping into old reactive patterns in relationship to afflictive states of mind is born out of clearly connecting and a non-judgmental knowing. This is how it is in this present moment. We leave everything as it is. Our room with all of the boxes opened and the skeletons uncovered. And we find that we can be present in this moment of life without the old habit of giving the past, be it yesterday, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or maybe just a couple of moments ago, continued power over us. This is our possibility. There's a saying that comes from the time of the Buddha that goes like this: rain soddens what is kept wrapped up, but never soddens what is open. Uncover then what is concealed, lest it be sodden by the rain. We can't be free from something that we don't see or from something that we ignore. Sri Lankan monk Bhante Gunaratana said the following in his book, Mindfulness in Plain English: view all problems as challenges. Look upon negativities that arise as opportunities to learn and grow. Don't run from them, condemn yourself, or bury your burden in saintly silence. You have a problem, he says. And then he says, great. More grist for the mill. Rejoice, dive in, and investigate. And then I add, within the heart of kindness. And so we sit quietly, focusing on the beautiful breath. And quite likely at times, all kinds of things come to the surface. Really, the mind, or at least minds that aren't yet totally purified, are primarily a set of mental habits, conditioned habitual ways of thinking and feeling. To change, they must come to the surface and be acknowledged, accepted, and clearly seen. And this takes time. We can't hurry it. We just simply resolve and we persevere with great patience. And the rest will essentially take care of itself as long as we keep practicing. And sometimes there's resistance and fear to this opening. Anxiety, tension, worry, and doubt are created by and manifest to the degree of the strength of our resistance. Resistance is based in fear, and this can be kind of a vicious cycle. And so we practice with great gentleness, kindness, and deep patience for and with ourselves in through this process of opening to and relinquishing our conditioned, habituated patterns of suffering, relinquishing our addictions of mind. Again, from the great Indian teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj, he said, don't bully yourself. Violence will make you hard and rigid. Don't fight with what you take to be obstacles on your way. Just be interested in them. Watch them. Observe. Inquire. Let anything happen, good or bad, but don't let yourself be submerged by what happens. So I'd like to take a bit of a look now at what is maybe the most subtle and yet one of the most deeply pervasive aspects of suffering in this life, which is so directly connected to the suffering that we experience in relationship to difficult mind states. And this suffering is that, this is the suffering that's inherent in ignoring the truth that everything in this world, everything in this universe comes into being through the combination of a multitude of conditions. Everything is related. Everything is relative. One thing leads to another. Because of this, that. Everything is contingent and thus conditional. Everything is in relationship. And in truth, in an infinitude of changing relationships, including the arising of anger, fear, worry, sadness, judgment, doubt, strong desires and attachments, etc., etc. And yet, so often we believe that the opposite of this truth is the reality of things. Taking our experience and things to be as though they're quite solidly and singularly in place and here to stay, which will always eventually create suffering for ourselves and also for others. We grasp onto the past and project into the imaginary future and solidify both in our mind, and yet life just simply keeps flowing along. The good news is that an amazing thing about suffering itself is that it too is a conditional, totally relative, contingent aspect of life. It's not an absolute. So from this perspective, we can say suffering is optional. Maybe you never thought that, but it's optional. Here where I live in Taos, New Mexico, during midsummer and early fall, we have what we call our monsoon season. And in the big open sky here in Taos, we often have huge arches of rainbows appearing, often even double rainbows. A rainbow appears because of particular conditions coming together. Just the right amount of moisture in the atmosphere, the angle of light being just right, And then, of course, one has to be in the right place at the right time and looking in the right direction. And it all changes so quickly. Everything in life, including ourselves, meaning all of our experiences of body, heart, and mind, are really like a rainbow. The coming together of a changing set of conditions that are totally relative, related, contingent, conditional, and empty in and of themselves. And it's so obvious with rainbows, but not so for most of us with the more solidly appearing and sticky mental and physical phenomena. Our rainbow body, our rainbow mind, including emotional states of mind, which for many of us can be the experiences that we most readily identify with and get stuck in. Thinking of things and experiences, the various states and moods of our mind as permanent, unchanging, and identifying with any of these as me, mine, I, will inevitably bring suffering. The degree to which we grasp, cling, and identify with our experience, whatever it may be, pleasant or unpleasant, physical or mental experience, the degree with which we grasp, cling, and identify with our experience, this is the degree to which we'll suffer. Our practice is about really, truly being present. This present moment, and this present moment, and this one, just as it is, right now, right now, right now. It's not that the present moment causes suffering. It's the desire for it to last, or the desire for this moment to be different, that causes suffering. Liberation isn't rooted in anything imaginary, pretended, hoped for, wished for, philosophized about, avoided, or ignored. We have this saying in English. I'm sure you're familiar. Ignorance is bliss. Well, ignorance isn't bliss. In the clarity of the Buddha's teachings, ignorance is ignorance and bliss is bliss. And in fact, ignorance provides the very fertile ground that delusion needs in order to sprout. Delusion manifests as an unknowing because of the lack of mindful penetration or the concealment of the real nature of things. With this delusion of unknowing, there's an absence of right or true understanding that is experienced as a kind of mental blindness or mental darkness. This is what delusion is. And it's caused by a lack of careful and wise attention. This is really the root of all that's unwholesome. But fortunately, ignorance and delusion are only conditioned, impermanent, contingent states of suffering. Just two of the many hues of the ephemeral rainbow of our experience. So going on now with exploring just a few specific hues of the rainbow, the mental states, the colorations of the mind that we experience, and beginning with fear. In our practice, and in our life outside of a formal practice setting, fear often appears in the guise of doubt, anxiety, worry, resistance, such as feeling like I won't attend to, I won't open to, I don't want to, or maybe I can't be with, I'm not sure that I want to be with this experience, this unfamiliar new experience, or this old familiar experience. I just can't be with this moment of life. And maybe feeling frozen or kind of caught, or just simply unable to open and receive the experience really fully and deeply with a mindful presence. And this goes for pleasurable experiences as well as painful experiences. So from this perspective, fear can manifest outwardly in relationship to situations and in relationship to other people as maybe judgment or blaming the critical mind. If we really take it up and if we believe it, it's his fault. It's because she, it's because they, it's because this place, it's because of the weather, etc., etc. And this fear turned inward can manifest as self-judgment, self-blaming, self-doubt, self-criticism, feelings maybe of unworthiness, of not being good enough, or just not being enough, not doing it right, not being able to do it right. Our practice, our life, our self not being right, not being perfect, whatever that might mean to each of us. Really, all of this is rooted in fear. So I'd like to offer you another approach to perfection, which is probably different from how most all of us have been conditioned to think of what it means to be a perfect person. And this comes from the Taoist master Chuang Tzu, his definition of perfection. The mind of a perfect person is like a mirror. It grasps nothing. It expects nothing. It reflects, but doesn't hold. Therefore, the perfect person can act without effort. Effortless effort, we call it in the Dhamma. We may have a habit of getting caught in identifying with the mind of judgment or doubt or blaming, criticism, inwardly in relationship to ourselves and outwardly in relationship to others, which is actually often a way of distracting ourselves from the fear that's lurking underneath. I think that often we're afraid of the fear. We're often afraid to actually look directly at it, especially if maybe we've taken a peek and found that it's certainly not been so easy. Years ago, one of my teachers told me when I came in for a practice meeting and fearfully reported the experience of fear, and he responded to me and said, "Fear is just fear." Well, when I heard this from him, my inward response, I did not say this out loud, was, well, yeah, that's really easy for you to say. Obviously, some degree of resistance and quite a bit of irritation with this thought. But it stayed with me. Fear is just fear. And eventually, I began to see, yes, fear is just fear. As we gently, open-heartedly persevere with our practice of concentration and mindfulness-based practices rooted in kindness. In relationship to ourselves, we begin to be able to meet and receive fear, to come close to it, to look it in the eye and not be so bound, not be so imprisoned by it, and not be shut off out of fear to the vastness of possibility. Hafiz, the 12th century Persian poet, said this: "Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would like to see you living in better conditions." As our mind and heart get stronger and our concentration, mindfulness, and metta muscles develop, we can begin to acknowledge the presence of fear. Accept that it is. And know that it doesn't need to run our life. It's not who we are. It's not mine. It's not me. I'm not a fearful person. Fear happens because of a multitude of conditions coming together in this moment. It's not an independent, solid, static something. The arising of fear in this moment is totally dependent on many, many conditions, some of which we can see and know, and many of which we don't know and may never, ever see. It may be a moment of very intense experience, but when we begin to practice seeing clearly from this perspective, we begin to understand that it's not something solid or permanent, and it's clearly not me, not mine. And it's not that the energy of fear will never appear again. We learn to be steadfast. We learn to stand in the fear. We learn to lose the fear of fear and begin to see it clearly. We begin to see through it and know its nature, like we see through the hues of a rainbow. Some years ago, in National Geographic magazine, I read an article about a woman named Gerlinde, a 40-year-old woman who was the first woman to climb K2 in the Himalayas without oxygen. She did it with a group, a climbing group, which included her husband, a small group of people, which included her husband, Rolf. And this is from that article, Rolf talking about his experience of fear and Gerlinde talking about her experience of fear. Gerlinde's husband, Rolf, said, Rolf relished how the sensation of fear in his stomach revealed the margin of his ability and compelled him to pay attention. Gerlinde met fear with the quiet calm that possessed her when she was absorbed in what she had to do. When she kept herself completely focused on the task at hand, she didn't feel afraid. Gerlinde was a practicing Buddhist, and when she reached the top of K2, she placed a small Buddha that she had in her backpack on the top of K2. Maybe it's still there with snow on it. The Buddha's teachings offer us the possibility of a different perspective, a different relationship to things than how most of us have been conditioned, how most of us have been patterned. It certainly doesn't work to ignore or try to suppress difficult energies of mind, because what happens? Well, they just reappear. Putting a really tight lid on these mind states actually blocks and deadens our sensitivities, which keeps the possibility of Purification keeps the possibility of transformation at bay. And of course, it's not about blindly acting out and blindly believing afflictive emotions. This is like watering and fertilizing the seeds of our habit patterns. And again, I am repeating something important to remember, that our practice is not about purposefully dredging up and miring in analytically with all of the historical and projected stories that inspire strong emotional states. To practice and understand, we need to be able to come very close to our immediate experience, an intimacy of connection rooted in kindness with a very focused and mindful attention. With a mindfulness-based practice, this intimacy is in the spirit of investigation, in the spirit of, I like the word exploration, without pushing away and without pulling away from experience or without desiring it to be different. It takes a tremendous honesty and humility to really, truly practice. And it sometimes takes a lot of mindfulness and metta energy directed towards ourself to open to and to be with and to clearly see things as they are. Mindfulness and metta don't cover over anger, fear, jealousy, clinging, irritation. Practice changes our mind. It's about making the choice to transform our heart, making the choice to transform our mind. Our practice actually opens the heart and gives us the strength to not turn away, to not distract ourselves, to not pretend anything, but really to stay still, be here, be in present moment relationship with what is, with a very natural strength that comes from the expanding capacity of our heart and mind. So now I'd like to spend just a bit of time exploring one of the other colorations of the mind, anger. What's often overlooked is the disastrous effect of anger, the harm that anger does to oneself. The first person hurt is always the one who is angry. An angry mind is a suffering mind. An angry mind is agitated, tight, narrow, constricted. The quality of awareness changes. Clear seeing and perspective pretty much vanish. One often feels quite restless and driven. Nothing satisfying. Sleep can be quite difficult. The body's tense. With anger, the sense of self looms very large, and so does the sense of the other. One of the primary reasons that anger is so painful is that it very quickly creates a sharp separation between self and other. It's as though a line is drawn that isn't to be passed, with each angry moment deepening the imprint of anger in the mind stream. Something that's both amazing, simple, and difficult to see is that irritation, anger, fear, rage, hate, clinging develop from a momentary, contracted, unpleasant feeling that went unnoticed, that wasn't recognized, that wasn't met with mindful attention, and went unnoticed. So again, as Christina talked about quite a bit the other day, again, pointing to the total conditional nature of afflictive states of mind and the importance in our practice of seeing momentary unpleasant or pleasant feeling tone that shows up in relationship to our experience. The point at which we become aware of anger or any other afflictive mind state depends on the quality, the clear, focused, concentrated strength and depth of our mindful attention. So, how can we work with anger through our practice? And this goes really for any of the afflictive states of mind. Anger is not solid. It's made up of many, many different components, thoughts, stories spinning out, a specific mood of the mind, an emotional tone, and various changing body sensations. With all of this coming and going, arising and passing. As soon as you see the thoughts that are spinning out, the stories of anger or fear, or the stories of self-judgment or sadness or doubt or shame or greed or clinging or expectation or disappointment, it's really helpful to just try to just let them go. Let the stories drop away. Give them what I like to call no mind. Give them no mind. These thoughts aren't only the expression of anger, they're also feeding the anger, feeding the fear or shame or clinging, etc. They're like fertilizer for the afflicted mind. So let the stories go and bring the attention directly into the sensations of the body, feeling the emotional state directly in itself, but without the story. So what might you be feeling? Well, maybe heat, maybe tightness, maybe pressure or heaviness or contraction or some degree of vibration. Where is it? In the body. And very important, how is it changing? And notice the mind, meaning at this point, notice what your relationship is to these bodily sensations. Is there resistance? More contraction then. Really give this your best attention. Feel it, see it, know it. Is there interest grounded in kindness, grounded in acceptance of the sensations in your body? Take a look. And in the service of acceptance and kindness and patience, if the emotion is too strong to sit with, don't force yourself to sit with it. Do some walking meditation. You might even walk a bit faster than you usually do, bringing attention directly into the body and the breath with walking. And you might open up to the natural world outside. The trees in conjunction with the wide open spaciousness of the sky, the smells, the sounds, the warmth of the sun and air touching the skin, or the coolness touching the skin. Notice the birds, maybe chipmunks, maybe rabbits, the small creatures of the world, maybe baby seals. Don't indulge thinking. Stay mindful in the present moment, in the physical world, and in the body, and also in the breath. In those moments of a connected present moment attention, afflictive emotion disappears. It isn't present. The ease, the sense of well-being that arises out of a completely connected present moment attention is amazing, beyond compare in a quietly wonderful way. Resting in the natural world and resting in the breath can be both an immediate experience and a clear mirror of ease for us. Remember the mountain climber Gerlind's relationship to fear. The truth of the matter is that the energy that's present in strong emotional states, the energy doesn't disappear. The energy isn't lost in the purification and the wisdom that practice affords us. We don't lose the energy. In clear seeing that's free of ego interest, with a non-self-centered presence that isn't exclusively or predominantly in pursuit of our own personal advantages, such as power or control or pleasure or status or prestige or recognition, with a clear, non-self-absorbed, concentrated and mindful attention based in the heart of kindness. Therein lies the possibility of the relinquishment and the transformation of the strong energies of fear, anger, shame, greed, clinging, doubt, sadness, etc. So I'd like to spend just a brief time exploring the wanting mind, the strong states of desire, greed, clinging, and attachment. When we're caught in the energies of greed and attachment, we're blinded by desire. You've heard that statement and maybe experienced being blinded by desire. This is rooted in the desire that comes out of misunderstanding, the desires we project into the future, for instance, hoping, dreaming, fantasizing about what we think we need to get and how we think things need to be in order for us to be forever contented, to be forever at ease in our life. The thoughts that the satisfaction of a particular desire will give us something that in fact it can't, that it won't and can't. And of course, there are healthy, worthy, wholesome desires. All desire is not a bad thing. I mean, it's what in part got you on this your retreat, a wholesome desire. In light of our exploration this evening, I'd like to share a prayer, a personal practice, I was told, that was Mother Teresa's, one of Mother Teresa's prayers, one of her personal practices. And just to preface it by saying, I received it in the mail. And shortly after I opened up the envelope and read it, a friend called me on the phone. And I said, oh, I just got this in the mail. I have to read it to you. It's Mother Teresa's practice, one of her practices. So I read this to him, which I'll read to you in a moment. And his response was, oh my God, have I got a lot to do? You'll see why he said that when I read it to you. Well, true. You know, we have a lot to do, but I really find this this prayer quite inspiring. And this is it. Now, in her practice, it was deliver me, O Jesus. I'm going to say deliver me, O Dhamma. I hope that's okay with you. Deliver me, O Dhamma, from the desire of being loved, from the desire of being extolled, from the desire of being honored, from the desire of being praised, from the desire of being preferred, from the desire of being consulted, from the desire of being approved, from the desire of being popular, from the fear of being humiliated, from the fear of being despised, from the fear of suffering rebukes, from the fear of being slandered, from the fear of being forgotten, from the fear of being wronged, from the fear of being ridiculed, from the fear of being suspected. We do have a lot to do, don't we? But that's okay. We're doing it. How wonderful. I think many of us get quite attached to getting or trying to keep certain objects of our desire, and also expend quite a bit of time and energy trying to hold on to or get something back. Or we probably spend a large amount of time and energy trying to keep some experiences or someone from changing. So maybe that might even have happened here in retreat. Maybe the particularly wonderful sitting you had the other day. Or maybe even a particular period of practice that you had on your last retreat, or 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. It's the contraction, the clinging, the attachment, and the self-centeredness, the self-identification around desire that is the problem. I think we could safely say that attachment is the biggest problem in the world. A really good question you might ask yourself every once in a while. How driven am I by my desires? So a simple, very mundane personal example. Some years ago, I was teaching at a retreat center here in New Mexico that has some of the most wonderful, beautiful flower gardens that I'd ever seen. And I was walking along next to one of these gardens, and I noticed a really sweet smell. So I followed my nose to where the smell was coming from, and it was to a particular flower. So I got down really close to this flower and really took in the smell, just sniffed it in fully. Very present, aware of the pleasantness of the experience. And then I got caught. I had to go and do something else. But I really, really just wanted to stay there and continue experiencing that wonderfully sweet smell. So with that next moment of clinging and not being willing to let go and just simply go on, the pleasantness of the experience of the previous moment was totally gone. I was experiencing tightness in the body, experiencing a degree of burning irritation in the heart and the mind. Very unpleasant. But I got up and walked away to do what I needed to do next. But as I was walking away, there was still a clinging to this sweet smell, even though at that point it was completely and totally gone from my field of experience. I was attached at that point, attached to the memory of it. I was wanting it back. And I was planning as I was walking away, I was planning when I could get back to that garden, imagining just how nice it would be later when I could get back there and smell it again. So again, what just a moment before was a moment of pleasantness was no longer pleasant, but rather a moment of being caught in the grip of my clinging mind. It was a moment of suffering. And these moments happen so quickly. To sustain and deepen with our practice, two of the most essential qualities of mind and heart that are required of us are honesty and humility. Self-deception, self-delusion, and clear seeing. Clear seeing and honesty are incompatible, mutually incompatible. Vimala Thakar, who was one of Krishnamurti's closest students and who was a very profound and powerful teacher in her own right, said this about humility. And these are her words. That is the only austerity that is required of an inquirer, the austerity of humility to see things as they are, to see my inner being as it is, good or bad, to observe it as it is without defending it, without justifying it, without interpreting or judging it, without taking pride in it, and without relegating the responsibility of those states to other people. Humility is the perennial source of energy or freshness. Humility enables you to learn, keeps you pliable, perhaps to the last breath, I hope. she said. As we begin to sense, see, and know greed and clinging, we find that in fact, we're experiencing a kind of tension, stress, a burning desire. And for many people, there's often quite some confusion, the delusion that this state, this desire, this yearning, this attachment feels good. And it's even sometimes confused with love until we begin to see it and know it really clearly. The Buddha talked about everything burning. The eye is burning, eye consciousness is burning. The ear is burning, ear consciousness is burning. And he goes on through each of the 6 sense doors this way. And he went on to say, burning of what? And he responds to his question, to burning of desire, burning of hatred, burning of jealousy, fear, burning with the fire of confusion. Some years ago, I found a recipe in the old Inquiring Mind journal, which is no longer published, that I'd like to share with you at the risk of giving you a recipe that maybe you already have and occasionally cook up. And this is the recipe. The ingredients: 1 cup of what is, 1 cup of inability to accept what is, 3 tablespoons of complaints, 1 teaspoon of light whining, 1/4 pound of alternate scenario, preferably unattainable, 1 bunch of actual reality, 1 pint of idealized worldview, 2 teaspoons of perfection, and 4 sprigs of envy, minced for garnish. And here's what you do with the ingredients. In a large bowl, whisk together what is, with an equal amount of inability to accept what is. Stir in complaints and let sit until brooding and sulking set in. Add a dash of light whining, especially in the company of friends, but be careful not to overseason or they won't hang around. In a separate bowl, add alternate scenario to actual reality from your garden and separate the leaves from the stems. Then try to reattach the leaves in the exact pattern that existed before separation. Pour in idealized worldview and process in a food processor using off and on turns. When the mixture is pureed, add it to what is an inability to accept what is and blend. Add exactly 2 teaspoons of perfection and let stand until tears form. Garnish with minced envy and serve immediately. And the same teaching, worded quite differently from the Chinese sage Nan Xin. By not quite accepting because they do not please us, things that are so, we spend our entire life making meaningless gestures somewhere next door to reality. The Buddha offers us another recipe, the recipe of cultivating a strong and clear concentration and mindfulness rooted in kindness that meets the experiences of the moment and sees them clearly just as they are. We can actually learn to experience the extremes and the subtleties of afflictive emotions without getting caught up or swept away or overcome by them. It's as though we learn to see them so clearly that we see through them. We see their nature, just like we see through the hues of a rainbow. One way maybe not your usual way, that you might consider emotional states in relationship to your practice, is that they're the nourishing mud in which the lotuses of compassion, generosity, sensitivity, and wisdom can take root and blossom. And this is just a brief quote from the Vimalakirti Sutra from Mahayana Buddhism. Flowers like the blue lotus, the red lotus, the white lotus do not grow on the dry ground in the wilderness, but grow in the swamps and mud banks. Just so the Buddha qualities grow in those living beings who are like swamps and mud banks of passions. Well, for me, when I first read this teaching, it was wonderful. It was really an acknowledgement that as human beings, we experience many strong and difficult energies, the mud banks of passions. It's not that something's gone wrong. And so not to pretend to ourselves or to others that we don't feel these things. This is our human experience. This is what we have to work with. This is our path, at least part of our path. The suffering, the anguish, and the confusion that's felt in relationship to identification with afflictive emotions, what are sometimes called the poisons of self-centered existence, are for many people a potent aspect of the process of awakening. With these poisons being transformed through practice into what are sometimes called nectars or Buddha wisdoms. Afflictive emotions, or cankers, as the Buddha often called them, transformed into purified energies. When the thread of self is pulled out, strong afflictive emotional states can be digested into wisdom. So for just a moment now, I'd like to look at a few of these states and their transformative possibilities. Anger without the self, with no self-grasping, transforms into a mirror-like wisdom. The heart, the mind reflecting clearly. It's from this that appropriate action springs. Wanting, strong desire without the self-centered quality, without self-referencing, transforms into the wisdom of clear, discriminating awareness. Sadness without self, with no self-grasping, has the possibility of digesting, transforming into the great heart of metta and great compassion. And lastly, fear without self is digested into the great, strong heart of metta, compassion, and equanimity, bringing us the capacity to connect without fear and without judgment. In the recipe that we've inherited from the Buddha, we learn to let go. We learn to relinquish what causes the burning. And in this letting go, we find what is sometimes described as the place of coolness. The place of coolness and luminosity in our heart and mind. The place of freedom from the burning. The end of suffering. As our practice begins to take deeper root and to blossom, we really truly begin to know that this moment is just enough as it is. And we begin to know through our own experience, as a result of our diligent practice, that a deep and potentially powerful concentration and mindfulness, these important and amazing aspects of our practice on this path to liberation, are available via our diligent practice through not clinging to anything along the way. Just over 20 years ago now, I took my mother in to live with me here at my home in Taos, which turned out to be the last 8 at the age of 92. She died in her bed. Within a short time after her death, I was sitting very closely and very attentively with her body in her bedroom. And while I was sitting there, I very clearly saw all of the tension, the accumulated tightness of anxiety, fear, irritation, and clinging. I saw all of this just dissolve from her face, with a transformation in my mother's face to an exquisite face of peace and ease. This experience was a very powerful teaching and inspiration for me towards deepening my practice in the here and now, with a strong sense of, I wait until death for this peace and ease. Our continuing practice here in retreat and in our daily life is bound to render us more patient, forgiving, generous, and inclusive, with goodwill, humor, kindness, compassion, and wisdom, and with more time and energy available to live to our heart's content. And let's sit quietly for just a moment. And thank you for listening to the Dhamma. And thank you for your practice. And we'll chant the sharing of blessings together to close this Dhamma talk evening. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice and through this act of sharing. May all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled.